All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual event space. So my name is Allie. You might recognize me from our Lake Forest Park location. I'm your host for this evening, and I'm so excited to be introducing Emme Lund and Sarah Neilson here to discuss Emme's debut novel, The Boy with a Bird in His Chest. But before we get into the good stuff, on behalf of all of us here at Third Place Books, I just want to quickly thank you all so much for tuning in. For those of you who may not know, we are an independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area. And as much as we miss having these events in our bookstores, it has been such a delight to expand this online program to connect readers and authors in a virtual space. So thank you all so much for tuning in and buying books. Your support is what makes all of this possible. So if you haven't gotten your hands on a copy of any of the books that come up this evening and you would like to, I will be linking books in chat. For those of you in the Seattle area, come on in, grab a copy off the shelf, or you can place an order online and come pick them up in store. Or if you're not local or not leaving your house, we of course ship. So go ahead and follow those links in chat over to our website. While you're over on our website, I definitely encourage you to check out some of our other upcoming events. We have an exciting roster coming up, including some events in person, which is very exciting. If you would like to stay in touch with our community, you can sign up for our newsletter. It's a weekly update about events and exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books for the quickest updates and recommendations. All right, so tonight we are here for about an hour, and towards the end we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which we very much hope that you do, go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or bottom of your screen. It is different than the chat box, which is great for virtual applause and connecting with each other. I absolutely invite you to share where you're tuning in from in the chat. We love to hear from you. But when it comes time for questions, make sure that those end up in the Q&A so we can most easily find them. While you're in our chat and question spaces, I want to remind you to please lead with kindness and refrain from any inappropriate behavior or harassment. And finally, should any technical issues arise, we will work as quickly as we can to resolve them. And we so appreciate your patience and understanding. All right, so now is the time to settle in, get comfy and cozy, because without further ado, I am so pleased to introduce Emme Lund, whose debut novel, The Boy with a Bird in His Chest, came out on Tuesday. So please join me, everyone, and welcome and wishing her a happy release week. Her work has appeared in Electric Literature, Time, The Rumpus, Paper Darts, and many more places. In 2019, she was awarded an Oregon Literary Arts Fellowship in Fiction. And in conversation this evening, I'm so thrilled to welcome Sarah Neilson, a Seattle-based freelance writer whose work has appeared in the Seattle Times, Shondaland, The Believer, Lit Hub, Catapult, and Them.us, among other places. They are the interviews editor at The Seventh Wave, and they write about all kinds of queer art, local literary culture, and the ways in which creative people work and live, and sometimes even agriculture. So the book this evening is The Boy with a Bird in His Chest, which Alex McElroy called the queer coming of age novel I wish I'd had when I was a teenager, and which New York Times bestselling author Kristen Arnett described as being about the ways in which family, grief, love, queerness, and vulnerability all intersect. So all of you here tonight, thank you so much for tuning in. And with that, I am going to pass the stage to our speakers. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Allie.
Thank you so much, Allie. How lovely. Happy to be here. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm really excited for this.
Me too.
Do you want to start out by giving a reading?
Yeah, I can do that. Help set the tone, help folks who haven't gotten a chance to hear the book yet, get an idea about what it's about. I'm going to read from towards the beginning of the book. There's not a whole lot to set this up. Janice has just had a baby named Owen, who's the protagonist of the story. And so this is, yeah, very early on after his birth. The bird did not show up in his chest for 5 days. In that time, Owen was diagnosed incorrectly with an extreme heart murmur and was given anywhere between 1 week and 85 years to live. The hospital room was a rotating door of doctors and nurses and social workers and grief counselors. Janice called the barrage of specialists trying to remove her son the Army of Acronyms. The Army of Acronyms was strong at the hospital, third in the world to police stations and city hall. Janice sat in bed with her boy on her shoulder and answered their questions and let them administer their tests. But each was a soldier moving closer and closer to taking her boy away. So on the second night, she got out of bed, dug her car keys out of the bottom of the hospital-issued plastic bag that contained her personal items, leaving behind her wet jeans and parka, and she left the hospital, vowing never to let another doctor near her child. She prepared to grieve. She thought at worst Owen could die at home as comfortable as possible. She turned the living room into a living memorial, placed peonies at the foot of his bassinet, cleaned his toys and arranged them near the television as an altar, and she smoked cigarettes like each one was a prayer that she whispered to the wind and blew out the dining room window. But each morning he woke up next to her. She got up, reheated a casserole left for her by a coworker, and put the coffee pot on. With each day that he survived, it seemed his luck increased. She investigated her son. His little toes like pebbles, microscopic toenails, and skin somehow paler than her own, so pale and new it was pink. On the third day, she woke up and found something seriously wrong with her boy. A large hole in his chest. 3 of his tiny baby-sized ribs were exposed, and inside the rib cage, next to his heart and lungs, was a baby bird. He was the luckiest boy in the whole world. Owen continued to survive and grow, and so did the bird in his chest. Each day, bird and boy getting bigger, both getting chattier, developing a rapport. When Owen was 3 years old, he already knew 2 things. The first thing was that he was not, under any circumstances, allowed to talk about or show anyone the bird in his chest. His mother told him so one night while Owen was tucked small in the folds of the couch, the bird named Gail tucked tight asleep in his chest. His mother's elbows were on her knees, leaning forward, her face lit by the one lamp in the corner. No one can know. She tapped her chest with 2 fingers. No one? No one, never. She leaned in closer to Owen, set a hand on his knee. No one, she said. They'll take you away from me, away from everyone, and they may take her away from you. She tapped her chest with 2 fingers one more time. The second thing Owen knew was that his lungs didn't always work right. Sometimes he and his mom would be at our friend Elaine's house. He'd be playing in her living room, running in circles while Gail told him jokes in his chest, whispered the punchlines up his throat so only he could hear them, and before he knew it, he'd be in a fit, wheezing and coughing, his lungs clamped shut. Some nights he woke up in the bathroom, the yellow light harsh against the cream tub. He could barely open his eyes. The bathtub faucet was a thunderous creak, and the applause of water running against the bathtub echoed off the bathroom's tiled walls. The water was so hot it burned to the touch. Even with the bath water near boiling and his lungs clamped shut, Owen felt a pull to the water. Like all would be better if he could climb in and let it hold him. His mother sat behind him, rubbing his back. She shushed him. It's okay. Just breathe in the steam. Breathe it deep into your lungs. Steam rolled across his face, and his face grew hot. He opened his eyes wide and let the bright room crawl into his brain. He tried to breathe in all the steam that rolled off the hot water. His lungs wouldn't listen. He breathed in short, quick breaths. His mother wore a nightgown printed with small lilacs from the frill collar down to the hems. She stared blankly at the wall, rubbing his back and turning the water hotter and hotter. His skin reddened. Gail ran her wing down his spine, careful to leave his lungs alone. Shh, she whispered. Shh. They sat in the bathroom until the water ran cold. Then they would move into his bedroom, and his mom would prop him up in bed to massage vapor rub on his chest. She crawled into his tiny bed built for her child and sat up next to him. Her left leg hung off the side of the mattress. She stared at the wall. His breast grew deeper. His ears were still cold, still wet from the steam. Like the sunrise, everything slowly settled until it was day again, and he could almost breathe like normal, and still his mom would sit next to him. She'd take the day off work, and they'd sit in bed together, watching the wall and listening to Owen's breath. It was 10 long years that Owen stayed locked in the house, never feeling concrete under his shoes, never seeing the sky above him. He woke up each morning and his mother was already off to work at the diner. A half-drunk cup of coffee left on the floor by the couch was the only evidence she'd been home at all. Every single day for those 10 years, he felt a strong urge to open the door and walk outside, but he remembered what waited for him. Doctors, police officers, scientists, and social workers, all itching to rip Gail from his chest and keep him from his mother. Just thinking about it worked him up so much he had to take a puff on his inhaler. His school was television. The British narrators of the nature documentaries taught him about instincts, the things Gail was interested in, even though she claimed they were wrong half the time. "Oh, that's not why we fly in flocks," she scoffed. Owen's favorite was his specials on ocean animals. He loved the way the screen filled with aqua blue, how sea otters and penguins and whales danced underwater. Even when he saw specials on killer whales or sharks, he thought the ocean seemed like a safer world. And he remembered The Little Mermaid. One afternoon, he learned about circus freaks. One-armed men, a woman with webbed toes, half duck, squeezed the boy with a bird in his chest right in there. Another afternoon, he learned about the Tuskegee experiment, and he knew his mother was right about the army of acronyms. The closed captions taught Owen how to read, and soap operas were best for his reading lessons. Dr. Paul Jones taught him that a double S can make the sh sound. Think passion. Jenny and Sarah Brentworth, twins, taught him about the UR and ER, murder. He loved the way the letter L rolled off Donovan's tongue and out his mouth in so many different ways. Love, world, betrayal, and lioness. After the soaps, Owen and Gail practiced the migratory patterns of other birds together in the living room. The front door was southern Mexico and the back door was Winnipeg. His mother's bedroom transformed into British Columbia, his bedroom Havana. Gail instructed him as he walked the paths from one end to the other. "It takes a long time," she said. "Walk it slowly." They set up glasses of water, short mugs of coffee, and bits of banana along the way. "Lots of stops for food and drink and sleep," Gail said. He took a nap somewhere in Nevada, just south of the couch. Owen and Gail taught his mother the bird migratory pattern game on her day off. She followed him along the route with a fan, insisting that it was the only way to really capture the feeling of wind under his wings. "Can you feel it?" she asked. And then, "Yes, Owen, you're soaring." And it really did feel like he was flying. Later at night, they walked the house and shut off every light until the house was pitch black, save for the bit of orange glow cast from the street light through the kitchen window. His mother placed her hands on his shoulders and walked him into the living room. "The secret to seeing in the dark," she said, "is closing your eyes and imagining your legs as roots digging deep, deep down into the ground. You have to feel the earth beneath you." He closed his eyes. Gail closed her eyes in his chest. He imagined his feet bursting through the wood floors and then the house's foundation and eventually the soil where they spread and dug into the ground. "Now," his mother continued, "you are going to count to 30 and I'm going to hide. Your eyes will adjust to the darkness, and when you're finished counting, it will seem bright as day." He counted to 30, eyes sealed shut, so much darkness it hurt. When he opened his eyes, everything was clear. The couch, and behind it, the dining room table, his mother's rocking chair next to the window, and no mother, gone like a ghost. He went from room to room until eventually he found her under her bed. Next, she showed him how to hide. The secret to disappearing is becoming invisible. She counted to 30 loudly in the living room, and he slipped as quietly as possible into a kitchen cabinet, the one to the left of the sink that held only a baking sheet. He held his breath and tried to imagine he was completely gone, disappeared. Even Gail played along, becoming a rock in his chest. His mom opened the cabinet and got on her knees. She leaned in, inches from his face, trying to make out the shapes in front of her. Owen thought for a moment that he had, in fact, become invisible. He couldn't hold his breath any longer, and he found it funny, his mom so close without seeing him, so he laughed, spitting on her face by accident. She laughed, the three of them on the kitchen floor, melting into a puddle of laughter on the linoleum.
That was so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, I was going to start out asking you a kind of a more general question about how you started writing this book, but I'm really thinking about, after reading that passage or hearing that passage, the idea of home and the role that home plays in the book. What does home mean to you and to Owen in the book?
Yeah, I mean, Owen in this book has a very complicated relationship with his home, especially at first. In the scenes I read and throughout the first few chapters, his mother doesn't let him leave the physical house, his home. He's trapped inside, not even allowed to go outside in the backyard until he's 14, when he starts sneaking out. So yeah, I think he's very scared of leaving his house, but also feels trapped and he wants out. But also in many ways, I'm somewhat envious of Owen in that he has Gail, who lives inside of his chest, who feels like a home to him. I think that she's a sense of comfort, although she does put him in danger at times. But she's a sense of comfort for him. He feels at home when she's present, when she's talking to him and comforting him. There's a few points where she is scared or nervous, and she kind of gets quiet and huddles inside of herself and kind of disappears. And when those moments when he can't access her, he feels unstable. He can't really, in a way, access his home. Yeah, so I think home can be so many different things, right? It's a place that can trap us. If I don't know if anyone else has experienced being trapped inside a house for maybe 2.5 years, maybe the last little bit of time. I feel like everyone at this point is like, yeah, we get it. We all feel trapped. And then also home is also, besides a physical place, can be just a sense of comfort or feeling at home in our body, or at home around friends, or at home around our chosen family.
Yeah, well, Gail exists as a character, but she's also kind of an allegory. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that allegory at the center of the book, what it means that Owen has a bird in his chest.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I when I set out to write the book, I didn't intend for Gail the bird, of course, to necessarily be an allegory. I mean, she's a real living creature that lives inside of him. I knew I wanted to write a queer coming of age novel that centered queer joy and happiness, and chosen family. And one of the things I wanted to avoid was a sort of coming out story, or a character who really grapples with their sexuality. There have been a lot of great books that have written about characters who quote unquote come to terms with their sexuality. I didn't want that. I wanted someone who just sort of knew who they wanted, and just, the outside world was the problem for that. So my solution was to give him a bigger problem to deal with. When you have a physical bird living inside of your chest and you're paranoid about scientists and doctors and cops, kidnapping you for experiments. The fact that you're also queer is kind of the least of your worries. So it was sort of born out of that, but then of course the book very quickly became about, the secrets we keep, what we decide to share with others we love, how we decide to be vulnerable enough. And really at the center of the book is this question of what do we do when we feel like we may be the only person in the world who feels a certain way or experiences the world in a certain way, and how scary that can be to tell people about that. Owen is just so terrified that he's potentially the only person in the world who has a bird in his chest. And there's no way, he thinks there might be others, but there's no way to really broach that subject with anyone, because as soon as he shares that secret, he's then put in danger. And so I really wanted to capture that. And it was my way of, both being like, this character has a bigger fish to fry as far as like problems, other than his queerness, but then also talk about that feeling of queerness that I think a lot of us have experienced. I'm a trans woman who grew up in the 90s, so I very much relate to that feeling of feeling like you're maybe the only person in the world who is experiencing the world in this certain way, and just pushing onward anyways.
Definitely. That kind of touches on another important theme of family and community, and those two things can be separate and they can really overlap. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what family means to Owen, what community means to him, and how that sort of shifts throughout the book.
Yeah, the first 14 years of his life, his only community is his mother and the bird who lives inside of his chest. He really doesn't get to experience much outside of that. He has a very complicated relationship with his mother, to say the least. She's very paranoid, very frightening for her son. She's also young. She's 19 when she has him, and a single mother. And so she is sort of trying to figure out what to do with the fact that she has a baby in general, much less a baby who's got a bird living inside of him. So yeah, I think, that relationship is fraught. Later in the book, he goes to Puget Sound, Washington, where he lives with his uncle and cousin, and he's allowed to go to school. And through that, he finds a really wonderful group of friends, very, very important chosen family for him. He discovers punk music and finds a community through that queerness and through punk music. And it's really, I think, offers him so much hope, and offers him a wider perspective than the one his mother gave him by, locking him in the house doesn't give you much of a perspective. So yeah, he's able to find community, and that means the world to him. It really allows for him to understand how he can see a future where he shares bits of himself with the world, or maybe he tells people that he has a bird living inside of his chest. It allows him to fall in love. Yeah, I think, and two, he lives with his cousin and his uncle, who are blood family, of course. And his cousin is really the person that they are best friends. And is so lucky that he gets that. Not everybody, particularly queer people, have necessarily blood family that they have those connections with, and so we do have to seek out chosen family and a wider community outside of our blood family. But yeah, I'm so glad that Owen got that with his cousin, and to a lesser extent, he connects with his uncle too.
I love the relationship with Tennessee, and she's one of my favorite characters. You mentioned punk music. I'm wondering if you like punk music, or if there's any, like, what role music played for you while you were writing the book?
Yeah, music is a huge part of my life. my first love was books, and my second love was music. Shortly thereafter. Yeah, I mean, when I discovered music when I was, I mean, I always really got into music, and when I was younger, I weirdly really liked country music when I was like second, third grade. Like I had a big cassette tape collection, and would listen to the radio and record country music off the radio, and would call in my favorite songs so they could play it so I could get it on cassette. And then when I was about 12 or 13, I discovered punk music, indie music, and uh, rock and roll in general. And it really, I mean, it saved my life in so many ways. I started going to shows. I would sneak out of my house to go. I grew up in a really conservative, pretty sheltered home, so I'd have to sneak out when I was younger to go to shows, and I would do that frequently. I yeah, I love music. I love going to shows. I played in bands when I was in high school. That was how I found community. That was how I connected with people, was through music. Um, I'm obviously very still into music and still go to shows and things, although I'm not having to sneak out of my house, nor do I play in bands anymore. But yeah, I mean, while I was writing this book, all bigger projects, I make a big playlist of sort of songs that I think are like kind of vibes for the work that I'm working on. And on this playlist, I just really started collecting all of Owen's favorite music, just songs I thought he would love to hear. Selfishly and coincidentally, it's music I loved that I like to listen to too. And I think when I finished writing the book, it was something like 200 songs long. Really just a beast of a playlist. I did shorten it down to the much more acceptable 15 songs. And that is available. I've put it up on my Instagram. I think there's a link in my bio there. And we also, I'll see if I can find it, but there's an annotated playlist that my publisher put out that I wrote that's like reasons why I picked this song for the playlist, and what that song in particular means to me and meant to the book.
Yes. I have yet to listen to that playlist, but I'm going to do that right after this event.
It's great. I still listen to it at least once a week. It's a good kind of getting ready playlist for me.
Oh, that's perfect. Another thing that shows up a lot in the book without giving too much away is the moon. And I saw that you wrote this listicle for Electric Lit really recently, this week, I think, that I thought was like the perfect framing for a listicle, which was what books to read during which phases of the moon. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the role of the moon in the book, how it sort of shows up in the book, but maybe also in your creative practice, which you sort of hinted at in that Electric Lit article.
Yeah, so I absolutely adore the moon. I mean, see if you can see that right there, of course. And then I don't know if it's gonna be backwards or not, but my knuckle says moon glow. Yeah, absolutely love the moon. And I mean, in the book, Owen, the crowd of teenagers he falls in love with and really builds a community with are all sort of like witchy, particularly Tennessee, are really witchy kids kind of trying to figure out how to find a sort of ritual practice. You know, Tennessee reads a lot of tarot. She gets excited when the moon's full, and they do some rituals. And it's just always a presence in the sky. And he's constantly talking about what the moon's doing, and there's a point where they go to the beach and they all howl at the moon, which is one of my favorite moments in the book. Yeah, I think I talked about it a little bit in that book list for Electric Lit, but I have found a rhythm with the moon within the last probably 6 years. It's been part of my own personal practice where I can, you know, I'll try to set my month or my year based on what the moon's doing. You know, when it's new and just starting to show light. I try to really set my intentions for the next 4 weeks. I think about what I want to accomplish, how I want to feel, what I want to pay attention to. And then as the moon progresses and grows full, I really put in concrete efforts to reach those goals, to manifest what I'm working towards. And then, you know, as the moon wanes, I take time to really let go of things and to rest. I mean, first of all, it feels great. Highly recommend it to anyone who's thinking about doing it, because we do. I mean, we really have been working with the moon since the beginning of all time. Farmers still plant to the moon. There, so much of our culture is based on lunar cycles that we don't even recognize. Yeah, I think it's really felt good, and you know, it's a really great way to, of course, accomplish things, which I think is important, but also under a capitalist society where we're told to produce and produce and produce, and we've got hustle culture and all that going on, to have built-in space to release, to rest, to go quiet. I mean, there's times of the month where when I can help it, I don't check email. I rest. I just go quiet for a few days while the moon is dark and try to listen. And it's built in. It's built into the schedule. Highly recommend it. Yeah.
I love that. It's also making me think about creativity, and creativity under capitalism is something I think about a lot. But I'm wondering if there's any way that you may make sure that you protect your creativity, or if you have any other sort of rituals or anything to get into writing mode or creative mode.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I have a writing studio here in my house in Portland, which for me, the most important part of writing has been to have a dedicated space where I can sit and work. Even when I got my first apartment and I was 18 years old living in Portland, I had a big closet and I just moved a desk in there and would work in a closet. But it just helps me, helps the brain start to flow and helps creativity come. Also gives me a space to kind of leave work behind. I tend to overwork. If it was up to me, I would probably write for 20 hours a day, which is not healthy and not good, right? I do not want to become Danielle Steele, no offense, but her work schedule sounds just absolutely bonkers to me. Yeah, it's important to rest. It's important to step away. It's not good for the writing. It's not good for your spirit or your physical or mental body. So it's nice to have a room that I shut the door on and I leave and I go eat dinner and I have the rest of the house. And some days I don't even go into that room. And when I don't go into that room, I don't work unless I'm just taking notes or something like that. So that's always been important in my practice. I also do include a bit of witchiness into my mornings. I often sit and draw a tarot card, maybe light a candle, although I try not to do that. I try not to tie it so much to my creative practice, because then I start to do things like, oh, well, I can't do any writing until I've lit a candle, and it's just a way for me to come up with excuses to not write, which is also something like, I'm on both ends of the spectrum. I will overwork and work for 20 hours if you let me. And then also I will do anything I can to procrastinate and not go to work. So I try to balance those two things. Yeah, I just really the dedication of space and time to writing and just giving it the attention I think it deserves is what's mostly important to me.
Mm-hmm. I really feel that the extreme procrastination or burying yourself in work.
Yep. Exactly.
Yep. To circle back to the book itself, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the importance of place and nature in the book. A lot of it takes place near Puget Sound and in the Pacific Northwest. Some of it's in the Midwest, but if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up here in Oregon, spent a lot of time, and I was in Portland until I was about 11. My grandfather lives on the Puget Sound, just outside of Olympia, and so I spent summers at his house. I mean, he lives on the water. He had an oyster net cast out most of the time. So I spent my summers on Puget Sound. My wife is from Montana, from Missoula, Montana. The book takes place in a fictional town called Morning, but it happens to be maybe 20 miles from Missoula. Yeah, I think place is so important. I think being in nature was something I grew up doing. I spent a lot of time just in awe of the nature here in the Pacific Northwest and in Montana in my 20s when my wife and I started dating. Yeah, it makes sense to me that we would commune with nature, that we would be in its awe when we're near it. I mean, Owen does not spend much time in cities. He is mostly in the woods. He's mostly, at the beach. He loves the water. Of course, he feels drawn to the water and a pull to deep water, particularly. And that just made absolute sense to me, especially for someone who has a bird living inside of his chest. Like, I feel like Gail wants to be in nature too. Yeah, and it also, in a lot of ways, I think the woods and nature are sort of terrifying to Owen. They, offer a bit of danger. He's scared of the woods next to his uncle's house after he has a bad experience in them. He thinks a lot about wading into the ocean and just living. He says he'll live underwater, which is of course dangerous and suicidal ideation. So yeah, I think it just made sense to me that I would include all of these places when I was writing about the Northwest, and that they would be at times comforting and at other times very dangerous.
I'm going to ask you one more question and then move to the Q&A because I see some good questions in there. But I wanted to make sure I also asked you about the army of acronyms and how that translates to our world and what role that plays in the real world and in the book.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've done a couple of interviews with this for this book, of course. I've done a ton of interviews, and I've had a few, I will say all have been cis straight interviewers who were like, army of acronyms, how did you come up with this? And I'm like, oh, I didn't come up with it. This is it. I mean, I'm a trans woman who's medically transitioning, living in the United States. I grew up poor. I watched my friends get taken by Child Protective Services. I've known really good friends of mine who are stuck in the foster care system. We live at a time in the United States where there's more anti-trans legislation being argued and passed in the United States than any year combined previous. It's, clearly an onslaught. And so I think, there are real dangers to being trans, to being poor. We know that the police brutalize Black folks in our communities. And so I think in a lot of ways, Janice is so right to be paranoid for her son. I did make doctors and nurses in the medical establishment sort of the danger in this book, which sounds kind of, might sound a little silly when the danger we're facing is legislators who are trying to ban doctors from practicing medicine on trans youth. But also in reality, there are doctors who are unwilling to practice hormone replacement therapy for trans youth or for trans adults, who are unwilling to practice informed consent, which allows us to access things like hormone replacement therapy and surgeries without a million notes from psychiatrists. Yeah, I think it's a very tricky thing to balance. But I do think that, of course, medical transition and the medicine that we seek is between us and a doctor, and more doctors are giving us access to, I mean, most doctors give us access to that medicine. There aren't many left who don't. And yeah, it was no question that this would be the enemy, this would be the danger to Owen. Whenever I sat down to write this book, you know, I had a lot of questions, and one of them was like, what is he in immediate danger of? And it's someone finding out his secret, and that person being connected to either a medical establishment or the police or, you know, social services. I think those things, I think doctors and social services can do good work, but I also think that when you're poor, when you're trans, when you're Black or brown, they can also brutalize you as well.
Yes. And that even shows up in the language, sort of the army of acronyms, or the outside world calls people like Owen a terror. And there's a really great question in the chat from Claudia that I want to ask. That is, if you were a terror, what animal would be inside you?
I love this question. So I think for me personally, I think, you know, it's up to each person what animal they have inside of them. But for me personally, there's no doubt in my mind I would have a salamander just in my right ass cheek. Absolutely, just in my buttocks, just in my right cheek for sure.
That is a truly excellent answer. Thank you.
Yeah, Sarah, what about you?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I don't know.
Take time to think about it. Maybe
maybe I'll circle back. I was not planning to answer any questions tonight, so I'll think about it and circle back.
Sorry to spring it on you.
That's okay. There's a question from an anonymous asker that says, you mentioned several bands in the novel that Owen feels, quote, crack him open. What books do you think would have that effect on him, or what books would you recommend that Owen read?
I mean, I think Owen would and should absolutely read a book that was important to me while writing this book, which is Tom Stambaugher's Now is the Hour. Fantastic queer coming of age story about a boy trying to get the fuck out of like rural Idaho. Just really, really good book that centers queer joy. Something I really kept returning to as sort of the home book for this book. I think he would really, I'm homophobic, content warning, homophobic slur coming, but he would absolutely love The Faggots and Their Friends Between Revolutions by Larry Mitchell, with drawings by Ned Asta. It was a book published in the 70s, just to a small press. It was just reprinted by Nightboat, I think in 2019. So luckily I don't have to read it on a PDF on my phone anymore. So good, fantastic, just really, really unique story about just queers fighting against oppression, and this sort of like fairy tale like telling. Oh, it's so fantastic. Highly recommend that. And then I think there's some new books out that Owen would really appreciate. A Dream of a Woman by Casey Platt, a collection of short stories that's really fantastic. And I think he would find great delight in The Atmospherians by Alex McElroy, which is about people starting a cult to fight toxic masculinity, and Owen is always concerned about toxic masculinity, so I think he'd be tickled by that one.
I love that book. I hated every character in that book, but I loved the book so much.
Oh, it's so good. And yeah, they're all terrible people.
Yeah. Well, just in case you haven't already completely answered this, Roberta asked the question, which writers excite you? Are there any others that you didn't just mention just now?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're going like span of time, not contemporary, one of the writers that I'm just in constant awe of is Clarice Lispector, who is maybe someone who doesn't really write a lot like my own work, but who I greatly admire. She was a Brazilian writer and passed in the 70s. But she writes just really wild, deeply moving books that are just impossible to explain. I always compare them to like taking acid or something, where you have these great epiphanies, but you can't explain it to anyone else. Just really, really wild stuff. Would recommend Now is the Hour, or not Now is the Hour, sorry, Hour of the Star, or The Passion According to G.H. As far as like contemporary writers, who doesn't love Kristen Arnett and Tori Peters? I'm really excited. Tori Peters, her book Detransition Baby was everywhere last year, still is everywhere as it should be. But she wrote earlier novellas, which I had always loved. And they're getting a reissue this year, which is so exciting to me. There's one in particular, it's called Infect Your Loved Ones and Friends. So fantastic, like dystopian future. Everyone has to take hormones. Oh, it's so good. And then another book getting a reissue this year is Imogen Benny's Nevada, which was really pivotal in my own life, my own journey, finding myself. And then also it's just a really, really great book about a trans woman just living life, not about her transition, not about, and there's a lot of pain, of course, but it's not what centers at it. It's just, yeah, a fantastic book.
Yeah. Just as a side note, Tori Peters is a really great person to follow on Instagram. She's doing a lot of like really cool, like homesteady kind of stuff, and I'm really into that.
She is. We were trying to do an event together, and we're trying to find a time, and then she went up and decided to move to Colombia. So she's there for the next few months. So now her Instagram is all like tropical pools, and yeah.
Claudia has another question. I love the names in your books and how they range from the commonplace, Bob and Elaine, to the more unique, Tennessee and Comet. What is your process for choosing character names?
I don't have a great answer to that question. My process is I listen to the characters and write the names as they tell me. I think I often don't trust it. Like I think like Bob and I think Gail too were both names that I was like, well, this is a placeholder. Clearly I'll stumble upon a new name as I write the book, but then a new name never came to me, and they were so deeply settled into those names by the time I finished a draft that I kept them. Yeah, I used to really like scour baby names books for a long time, and it was something I did, and I would put a lot of thought and effort into what the name meant and how that related to the character. But I found that often it felt forced in my writing, and I would go back and read drafts and be like, why this character would not be named this, even if it, fits. Even though if like technically by the name's definition it fits. So I let go of that, and I just try to listen to the characters, and sometimes, I mean, I'm working on another book now, and like a month ago I was struggling with these two characters, and I realized that they had different names than the ones I'd given them. So I am open to change. I am open to listening and changing the name, but usually it's the first one I settle on, and there's no rhyme or reason. It's just what comes to me while I'm writing.
You mentioned you're working on another book. Is there anything you want to say about that, or anything else you're working on right now?
Yeah, I can say a little bit about it without jinxing myself, I think. The way I've been describing it to myself and to others is it's about a group of people who learn to love themselves and move forward even while the world ends around them, in a world where both fairies and student loans exist.
Sign me up.
I'll put you down for a copy.
Awesome. I would love that. Is there anything in particular that you would like readers to take away from The Boy with the Bird in His Chest?
I'm always wary of expecting readers to take something away or hoping they take something away from my work. I think I hope readers see themselves in my work always. I hope there's something that feels good when they read it, maybe uncomfortable, but there's something that feels like being seen in my work. I hope that readers have a deeper understanding of themselves after reading my work, or a deeper understanding of those around them. I always say that I feel most successful when I'm writing work that readers are grateful for. So if I write something and a reader has gratitude for the work, that's the cherry on top. That's the end all be all. It's why I do it.
Cool. Well, is there anything else that you want to talk about, or any other last minute audience Q&A questions?
Is that it for the Q&A?
There is one question. What made you choose the Java as the bird inside Owen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wanted the bird to not be native to North America. I was like, the bird should be from somewhere else. For whatever reason, I think that part of me was like, I don't want someone to think that like an actual bird either flew inside of him or like somehow was present at the moment of conception, and that's why the Jeff Goldblum the fly situation. Like I don't want that. I want like it to be clear that this is something that is purely happenstance, that is purely magical. And so Java finches or sparrows are native to Java, of course, and Indonesia, Malaysia. And when I was writing this book, I have two pugs at home, and so I have to go to the pet store often to buy dog kibble and treats and all those good things. And every time I go to the pet store, I always swing by the bird section because I love watching birds. I'm a big bird person. And I just absolutely was working on the first draft of this book and loved watching the Java finches fly around their cage. They're really playful. Their songs are beautiful. They have these little kind of tweets that are really, really sing-songy. They love to play in water and take baths and kind of splash around. I've watched, 100 hours of YouTube videos of Java finches just like playing in water and flying around coops and things. Yeah, it was a bit of a process, and then also once I chose a Java sparrow, it made perfect sense that that's what she was, and the rest of it wrote itself.
I really like that answer. I like that you didn't want it to be a native bird. Oh, yeah. We have one more question that came up from Melanie. Do you think Gail would make Owen take her to Java, Indonesia someday?
Oh, that would be so fun. I don't think Gail would make Owen do anything, but I think Owen, I could see him as maybe like a birthday present to Gail. 4 days after his own birthday, they fly to Java so that she can meet other Java finches. Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. All right, well, there's no other questions. We'll have Allie come back up.
Hello, everyone. So I am back. We are about at the end of our evening. So I'm just going to take this last couple minutes to say a huge, huge thank you to all of you who joined us this evening. So many wonderful questions. I love seeing the chat blow up. So many incredible book recommendations. I think I almost kept up. There are a few I think I missed, but I mostly kept up. So if anyone's interested in any of those books, they're in chat. Go follow those links. For any of you who have not gotten your hands on a copy of The Boy with a Bird in His Chest, I'm going to link that one last time so you're not scrolling. So there is that. Go ahead and follow the links. Audience members, of course, let us know what you thought of this event in person or online. We always love to hear from you. It's the best part. So let us know. And finally, Sarah and Em, this has been such a delight. Thank you so much for being here. Do you have any last things that you want to say before we say good evening?
Thank you to Sarah. Thank you, Ali and Third Place Books for hosting us. This was an absolute pleasure. And thanks everyone on out there in the virtual world for showing up and chatting and asking fantastic questions.
And thank you. This was so fun, and I really loved reading your book. I'm very, very happy to be able to do this.
Thank you.
And the audiobook is also really good. So if anyone loves audiobooks, it's worth it. It's worth checking out. So I think this is where we say goodnight. So shall we let the awkward waving commence? All right. Good night, everyone. One more huge thank you.